In our reading from the end of chapter 9 of the Gospel of Matthew and in the early parts of chapter 10 of the same Gospel, we find Jesus embroiled in the midst of his real life ministry. He's out proclaiming the good news. He's healing people. He's casting out diseases and demons, all that kind of Jesus stuff that we love and know, but have a real hard time imagining. And in the midst of this, he calls his disciples and he commissions them and sends them out into the villages around and sends them out into a world in need. And what's interesting about the Gospel of Matthew is that Jesus does this not at the end of his ministry or not after the disciples have had lots of experience, but right in the middle of his own ministry, right in the thick of things, he sends them out. And he sends them out to do the exact same work he's been doing. He says, go out and proclaim the good news. The kingdom of heaven has come near. Cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out the demons. This is exactly the same work that Jesus has been doing. And he sends the disciples out to do it. This is one of those, it's not only Jesus can do this moments. He never said to any of us, this I have done and this you will never or shall never do. Jesus invites the disciples and therefore invites us to join him in his very same ministry. And he sends them out into the thick of it with a great sense of urgency. He says, the harvest is here and it is plenty, and there are few laborers. Get out there and help with the harvest. Such urgency he sends them. It says also about Jesus that when he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless. This one phrase we could preach 3 sermons on alone. He saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without shepherds, it says. Now, I was so glad to bump into this scripture and into this one word. He had compassion for them so early in my ministry at Shaughnessy Heights, because you will get to know that the Greek word for compassion is one of my favorite Greek words. Truth be known, it's one of the few Greek words that I know from the New Testament. The Greek word that we have translated as compassion is splagnisomai. Splagnisomai. It just rolls off the tongue. Splagnisomai. He had compassion for. But the roots of the word splagnisomai are the same as the roots of the word in English for spleen. Spleen, splang, splagnisomai. Spleen comes from the Greek for internal bowels. And when it says splagnisomai, the word we translate as compassion, and actually the Greek is saying a wrenching of the bowels or a turning or twisting of the bowels. Imagine, I say to myself all the time, and to you as a community, what would it be like if we were a people who had such compassion for the world that our spleens, our bowels were twisted, our stomachs were wrought with knots and twisted up so that we felt that kind of compassion for the world, a gut-wrenching compassion for the world. Splagnisomai. Oh, we could go so far if we felt that kind of gut-wrenching compassion that Jesus had for the people. I mean, these people were harassed and helpless. Hold on to that. Harassed and helpless. Jesus says the resistance will be great. The resistance to their ministry when they get sent out into the world. He says this, when they'll be handed over to councils, flogged in the synagogues, dragged before governors and kings, families will be divided and stigmas born because of his name. Who would want to join that mission? Who would want to join Jesus if you're going to be flogged, dragged, divided families, stigmatized? I mean, he doesn't make a compelling argument, a compelling invitation for people to join him. But he wanted the disciples to know the real truth. If you are going to have gut-wrenching compassion and you're going to be sent out into the fields to serve and to reap the harvest, you must know that you will be hated in my name. Well, we as good church people have very little stomach for pushback for our true calling in God. We love to be liked. Oh, is justice an uncomfortable idea for you? We'll just go home. Never mind. Don't worry, we didn't say anything. Sorry we bothered you, powerful ones, with our love speak. We church folks just want to be loved by you, the people in power. Sorry, status quo. We'll just slip away. Maybe sing a few quiet hymns as we go. We have little stomach when the world pushes back against the Christian church when it actually lives out its true calling in God. What is the harvest that Jesus was talking about? What is that harvest? He says to the disciples, the harvest is plentiful. Pray to the God of harvest, the Lord of the harvest, and you will help and go into the fields, and the laborers are few, and you're needed out there. What is that harvest? In our Christian imaginations, we talk about the harvest of the fruits of the Spirit, that the Spirit and the love of God was full, and it was so full, and people were ignoring it. The laborers were few, that the disciples had to get out there. But it's not in any way, in my imagination, not when Jesus lived, the placid, peaceful fruits of the Spirit that we think of. You know, pink fuzzy bunnies and little white lambs, the kingdom of God, the fruits of the Spirit. Wow, how nice. What a beautiful harvest. For the record, if the Spirit is involved, it's rarely placid and is most often disruptive. What is it? What is that harvest Jesus was calling them to go serve? If Jesus were here today, what fields would he invite us to go to? What fields would he send us to? You know, we have a great power. We are a people of immense privilege. And so we have an opportunity, no, a responsibility. The urgent calling from our God to use power and serve, heal, rail against, cast out. The last few weeks, the Black Lives Matters movement has been in the news far too often. Far too often because it shouldn't be in the news at all. It shouldn't be necessary. We've heard so much about BLM, Black Lives Matter. You see it on signs. There's been rallies. There's been protests. I find it really hard to speak about this, and I'll have to admit that over the last few weeks with the chaos of a move from Saskatchewan to here in Vancouver, my head's been kind of stuck in the sand. I know what's been happening, but I have not been involved, and I haven't taken the time to read all the articles that come my way and listen to all the words I should be listening to. I find it hard to speak about this crisis in our society, this racial divide that is true and apparent. Actually, I'm not sure I want to speak about it, because this is for sure a time for listening and action, not really a time for more Caucasian people to keep talking. We need to listen. We need to listen deeply and understand how it is we should be acting better. I worry about the platitudes that I see on social media, all the good-hearted folks who jump to the name of a cause or support a movement by posting stuff on Facebook or Instagram. I enjoy it. I love reading the articles, and sometimes there's some good ones. And I love seeing that my friends care so much. But we must be aware of how posting these things makes us feel part of the solution, when we have hardly even begun to be part of the solution. And in fact, in a majority way, still part of the problem. Now, you know, when I say that we are part of the problem, I'm not saying about each individual that is listening today. I'm not even speaking just about my own particular actions, but more and more we're learning that racism is a deeply systemic problem. It's an organism. It's part of our whole society. So when I say we, I mean us as a part of a system. We are hardly part of the solution. We are mostly still part of the problem. Then there are those of us desperate to find a way to dismiss the problem, dismiss the strong emotions, dismiss the upheaval and the anger, People who like to say, well, every life matters, doesn't it? Well, of course every life matters. Every life matters. But when we say that, we are trying to broaden, we're trying to wash out, we're trying to dismiss the particular problems that present themselves. Black lives matter. Indigenous lives matter. There is a racial divide in Canada. There is racial divides in the United States of America. Sure, every life matters, but we dismiss the people who are speaking their particular truth when we say such things. Why not see this if we're uncomfortable at all about the particularities? Why not see it as a people crying for justice movement? Black lives matter, Indigenous lives matter, people's lives matter. Any of these movements that create a defensiveness in us, maybe we could reframe it a little bit without taking away any of its power. By seeing these days as a people crying out for justice movement. They're a movement of people who yearn for a day when the lion lies down with the lamb. You know that from Isaiah. When the lion lies down with the lamb. There are people crying for that right now, this very minute. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but recently, one of the lions cleared out a whole bunch of people, a whole bunch of the lambs, so to speak, just so he could go to their church and hold a Bible up in front of the cameras. You have to worry when the lions think that God is on their side. What if we are being called by Jesus into this place? What if instead of easy words or support or hard words of dismissal or defensive postures, what if instead we hear Jesus sending us into these fields of crisis, these fields of oppression, these fields where death seems to reign, and yet where God says there is a great harvest to be gathered? Jesus gave the disciples authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to cure every disease and every sickness amongst a harassed people. Sisters and brothers, the worship theme at Shaughnessy Heights United this month is chosen to become. We have been chosen. We are called constantly. Do we want to be called? Do we want to be sent out? Are we up to the deep, aching process of becoming more, becoming better, becoming uncomfortable, becoming unpopular, and becoming fully God's people for a hurting world? I hope that as these days of crisis continue, as these issues at the core of what it is to live together in equality and love, as these issues continue, I hope and I pray that our answer to the call will be yes. May it be so. Amen.